I just want to start off by thanking everybody for participating today. Each and every single one of you is a outstanding member leader, and we would not be able to do what we do without your effort. So I just want to say, first off, thank you for being the member leaders. And, I know it's a thankless task more often than not. And this past year has definitely been obviously trying for anyone in this position, let alone what you have to go through on a regular basis in this capacity. So again, for myself, for AAUW national staff, really thank you for doing what you're doing out there locally and furthering the mission, even going through times are this tough for us right now. And it's especially tough for our branches because we know, as we've seen, given the average branch member age, it is the absolute demographic in the crosshairs for this pandemic. So that, again, thank you all for being a part of this today. And naturally, the impact of your day-to-day functions have been utterly upended by the pandemic. And so if you've been able to actually do any pivoting, any changes in what you do, you're already ahead of the curve. So I really want to be thanking you for doing that. And in fact, if any of you have any direct stories of either something that you and your state or your branch have done about the transition, I'd love to hear that. We're going to be sharing our contact information at the end of the presentation today. So I want to feel free and send me an email, because I would love to do something like a feature on that for Membership Matters maybe in the future. That's just a little self-serving plug there. But before we go too far, some general introductions here. I am Tremaine Parquet. I am the Deputy Director of Advancement here at AAUW, and I'm joined by my dear colleague, Nakia McFarland. She is our Engagement Associate, and we are going to be, today's program is going to be divided into two portions. The first of which will be me and Nakia going over some virtual programming kind of do's and don'ts, and just things that you should be aware of as you are making these pivots to digital virtual programming. And then at the end of the call, we're going to actually open this up so that you're able to connect with your fellow member leaders, do some idea sharing, and just general brain dumps as you kind of get into what are you doing in 2021 virtually as we go forward, especially as we're looking at a brighter horizon, but we're still probably looking at similar programming as we're doing right now for the foreseeable future. And even as we put this behind us, we're likely going to be doing some sort of dual hybrid approach. And I'll be talking a little bit about that as well. A couple housekeeping items to get us started before we really get underway here. The first portion of this program is being recorded, so that if you know of folks that were unable to join us live today, we will be having this on the website. Typically, it takes about 3 to 5 days to get that on the website after it gets uploaded and crunched through Zoom, etc. Again, one of the things that we're going to suggest is using speaker view if possible. That way, you'll have the slides as well as our faces when Nikki and I are speaking. To do. If you want to, when we get into the breakout session of the program, you might want to add your branch affiliation and role in your name. Not a necessary thing, but it might be something that helps facilitate conversation as we get into the breakout room session. And lastly, if you do have any questions or concerns or comments, feel free and use that chat function. Obviously, as I'm actively speaking, I may not be looking at that, but Nakia will be looking at it, and then vice versa when she's doing her role. And then at the end, we'll try and do, if we're not able to do full-on Q&A, we'll certainly be gathering all the chat that's gathered, so that way we can do a follow-up post-mortem, if you will, after the fact. So I think we want to start off by doing a quick poll, Nakia. Do you want to go on and launch that so everyone can weigh in?
Sure. All right, here we go.
Give about a minute or so to look at that. So this is really just gauging how many folks are making that pivot to doing some sort of virtual programming, and certainly in the last year, or certainly hopefully with plans to do something in the coming year. I'm seeing a lot come in. This is great. And you can also probably see this live on your screen as well. I'm looking at good 70% already participating. So I think we're at a good rate here, but we'll give it another second here for any last minute votes. This is awesome. I'm seeing some good stuff here. Okay, I think we can wrap it up there, Nikia, but I think this is a really good indicator. So I'm seeing about, 10% have at least, hosted a virtual fundraiser. 71%, that's amazing, have done some sort of virtual program, or 35, that's amazing to have done both virtual programs and fundraisers. And hopefully this is a conversation that we can start for the remaining 5% that haven't done anything, because we definitely want to try to give you the tools. And if you don't get that today, hopefully not, even if not from Nikia or myself, it'll certainly be something maybe that you get from your peers, your fellow member leaders, when we get to the breakout rooms. Hopefully, if you haven't had something, yet out the gate, you can certainly hopefully get some ideas as to what other folks are doing and how you might be able to implement some of that at your own branch. So we can go on and close that out, and let's go on and get started here. So I want to start by talking about how we are pivoting and why pivoting is so crucial. If you haven't asked yourselves the question of what you're doing in 2021 for virtual programming, it's definitely a question you should start asking yourself and your fellow leaders at your branch or state level as to what you are planning on doing. Because again, virtual meetings have been a necessity just by default for doing our part in helping to control the pandemic, but it's likely going to be a mode for the future. The pandemic has definitely made this an increasing digital world, and remaining relevant and for the challenges of the pandemic and in economic recovery, virtual programming is just going to be a necessity. So while we're all growing weary of Zooms like this, this is the way to engage with your members, and this is a way to stay engaged with your members and also your external audiences. And it's likely not going to go away anytime soon, even as we're looking at that blissful, hopeful horizon where the pandemic is coming to an end. This is going to be a norm for us. So be sure that you are working with your branch to gauge skill levels and familiarity with the existing program platform. So building familiarity with, navigating through something like Zoom, if that's your platform of choice, that is definitely something you're going to be able to assess the comfort levels in and try to either meet your fellow members where they are or be able to shore up their experience. That way they're able to get more involved and acclimated with the program so that they can continue to be engaging with you virtually and hopefully not, be not necessarily disruptive, but certainly, not maybe helping move things along. As you're working with your members to see who is the most savvy at a certain program, you're definitely going to want to then work on hosting workshops. Everyone, make sure we stay on mute. That is another thing. So that's, again, savviness with platforms is definitely going to be, the challenge is, of course, you want to make sure you're savvy so that when you're holding something, you're able to do it as seamlessly as possible. Because especially if you're going to be doing things like a public attended event like a fundraiser or a programming event, you certainly want to make sure you have a good handle on the technicalities of it. So again, you want to make sure that you find a platform, you work with your branch to gauge those skill levels, and then you make sure that you host workshops so that you can get everyone up to speed with being able to be familiarized, because they don't have to be hosting. They just need to necessarily be in a position where they can comfortably attend and participate because again, this is going to be a norm right now. All branches will need to make the pivot to continue to function and grow. Even after the pandemic, as I keep saying, if it's not going to be virtual, it's going to be a hybrid approach. And I think that's something even we here at the national office will be doing, where it's just going to be in-person events supplemented by some level of virtual programming. And one of the things that I am seeing here is that some of you likely live in states where, in-person events may not have been well attended, likely due to the fact that, you may have hours drive one way just to get to the event and an hour's drive back. And what we're seeing anecdotally is that that is a lot of time invested where folks probably would not participate in some branch events. And so the virtual space has been able to kind of level the playing field in that regard, giving equal opportunity access for a lot of members that may not have been able to engage and participate in the past. So again, that's just something I've heard a lot anecdotally, that one of the benefits and why this is likely going to be with us for quite some time is the fact that, this has made events and programming a lot more accessible for a lot more folks. And so if you do go back, like you're completely done, and like you said, this was just a stopgap measure and how we're going back to, business as usual, you might actually lose some of these folks because they've been able to participate in ways they may not have done before, or may not have been as convenient as before. And so now if you do that, you might actually end up losing from some folks. So you just want to be mindful of, again, adopting these approaches, because these pivots are going to be really essential. And so you've already, you've identified your stakeholders. You've identified folks that are savvy or are savvy enough with some of these platforms that they've been able to kind of educate the rest of your membership on them. So then you're going to want to make sure that you're integrating virtual programming wherever you can throughout your calendar year. And that's going to be something that is going to be really crucial. Just making it regular, making it something that just becomes like as easy as breathing or riding a bike. It's these things that if you integrate it so that's a natural function, this is going to be something that you can then hopefully continue to build upon. And the one more thing I want to note here is that not every branch is the same, as we clearly know, and not every platform is the same. So you want to make sure that obviously Zoom gets bandied about left and right, and their market share has likely skyrocketed over the last year. But they're not the only thing in town. There are other platforms that you can absolutely leverage in this space, and we certainly have seen that this is a space that has morphed and grown exponentially. There are platforms from Microsoft, from Google, even Facebook, that are trying to kind of get in on this little niche that has certainly blown up over the years. So don't feel beholden to Zoom. You also want to make sure that you get familiar with kind of like their terms and limitations. For example, Zoom as a free platform has certain limitations that a paid platform at certain denominations might be, reasonable for your branch or may not be. So you want to make sure that as you are assessing these platforms, that that you make sure that the price point is good, or that at the free entry point you're comfortable with what suite of options it gives you. I think that covers a lot from this slide. Again, it's just really making sure that this is going to be a norm for us. I think that even going forward, and like I said, nationally, we're already starting to see this, where you are going to be looking at some sort of hybrid approach as the months wear on, and as we're looking at actual real life potential in-person events as we round out the year. I do think we are going to still have and see a virtual component to a lot of this going forward. So it's a good thing to be making sure that you're making sure that we're on top of your branches, aware of the platforms, familiarize yourself with the platforms, and start really working with them and integrating them into your calendars. So I want to go on. So this one is about fundraising in your PJs, but actually some of these tenets here are not just specific to fundraising. I think you can actually apply some of these principles much more broadly. So I want to start off by saying that, there's going to be an eagerness again to return to some tried and true practices, especially in fundraising that you've done in the past. I know, obviously the vaunted book sale is definitely something that I know a lot of folks want to get back to, and you might be able to reasonably do that, especially, maybe towards the end of the year rather than earlier now. But, those are certain things that you're going to slowly get back into. But, there are certainly ways that you want to be able to do, open up your ways to virtual fundraising as well. One of the benefits of actually doing virtual fundraising is that it actually makes your work a little bit more impactful. And what I mean by that is that if you're devoting less time to costs, things like finding and renting spaces for your events, then honestly, that's more money that's going to go towards the mission, which is obviously something we're all very passionate about. So again, there's things that when you remove some of the physical components, you might actually be helping, the bottom line, if you will, especially when it comes to fundraising. Another one of those benefits, and kind of like I mentioned earlier, is that, doing things virtually is broadening your reach. And that's not only just in terms of the audience you can potentially reach, but also those that could be helping with the fundraiser itself. And again, like I said, you can kind of apply some of these tenets to other virtual programming and events as well. And this also includes, so if you're doing like a virtual happy hour or a walk or an auction, again, this is something that the accessibility, being able to do all of that from the comfort of your home is really going to be appealing to a broader audience that may be going to a physical space and engaging in those actions. It also means you can collaborate a lot more. So this means that partners that you may not have worked with previously, or you might be able to actually engage with now. So example, again, you have large states where regionally it might not have been made sense to work with a branch all the way, on the eastern side. So it's like now you can actually work together and collaborate in different ways. And so you can have these joint fundraisers or things of that nature that you might not have entertained before because, again, just geographically and logistically, it just didn't make sense. So again, these are just some tenets that, again, you can apply to fundraising especially, but they work really well for other programs. So again, you always want to make sure your events are purposeful. So for some events, or the case of support is really easy. Let's take for instance an auction, for example. If you have like coveted tickets for something at an event when events are actually a thing, that might be in and of itself a case for support that you don't even really need anything else, or you just have them because that's such a tantalizing item. But otherwise, you really are going to need to make a case of support based around what you're fundraising around, and that might hopefully comes a little bit naturally for us because AAUW, I hope you agree, has a very compelling mission and a need for support. So you can interweave that mission with what you're fundraising around, and hopefully, again, get folks to fundraise around those things. It's always good fundraising etiquette, just in general, to be transparent about where the money is going. So it's always good to be mindful of that. Engaging. Now, this is something where, when you're hosting things, especially on Zoom, like doing a fun poll or something like that, you keep your audience, when you keep your audience engaged and active, that also helps with feeling good about potentially, making a contribution or something of that nature, or attending an event. So if you're having a programming event, you're being interactive throughout as opposed to, other means, that, again, that level of engagement keeps folks either wanting to join, to give, or just to attend another event down the road where you might make those asks in the future. And be creative, but don't be intimidated. When I say creative here, it's really not so much about coming up with the next best new thing or having to create something really from scratch. This is really about being creative about how we think about things and not necessarily thinking we're going and venturing into uncharted territory. This is really about making tweaks to things that you've been doing, but thinking about them in a virtual space to make them applicable now so that you don't have to wait for months and months down the road until you're able to do something. These are things that you might be able to implement right away if you do it, online. So we did a program previously, a webinar with some of our 5-star branches called Programming During a Pandemic. And I highly recommend, if you haven't, to look at that, because that's real life examples of real branch leaders making the case for what they did during the pandemic for their programming. And we even had someone from Wisconsin give us a really good fundraising idea as well. And at the tail end of that webinar, I also briefly got into some general ideas, like I said, silent auctions and tasting and stuff like that. Those are things that you can do virtually for fundraising that can really help. And again, this, I think, makes sense. Or being organized, we know how a lot of this takes planning. It's the same level of planning and forethought you might want to give for your in-person events. So be sure that you are, planning and thinking things out just as you would for an in-person event. So again, like I said, a lot of these tenets can be applied across the board for your general events. And I want to now hand it over to Nakia, who's going to talk a little bit more about the membership and side of this and how, virtually engaging can still help with that.
All right. Thanks so much, Tremaine, and thank you all so much for joining us. I've been reading your comments in the chat box, and I'm just really excited by all the different ways that you've all been able to navigate this pandemic. So you guys are ahead of the game here, and I'm loving it. So I'm going to jump into the recruitment and retention side of things. All right. So, as Tremaine mentioned in his earlier comments, virtual platforms are a real opportunity for us, right? When this pandemic first started, it seemed kind of paralyzing at first because we're all so used to these in-person events. But once you get the hang of these virtual platforms, you realize you can really maximize the time and your effort and all the resources that are going into your advocacy and all the activities that you're doing with your branch. And all of that applies to your membership goals as well, right? So while we're all sort of crossing our fingers for lightened restrictions, there's going to be a new normal that we all have to adjust to in some ways. And so that's going to require us to be more online and to be more internet savvy, and especially if we want to continue to grow our branches and to keep our current members engaged, right? With that said, when you're thinking about how your current members are engaging with your branch, you want to make sure that they're not just passive participants, right? You want to make sure that they're actively engaged and invested in the success of your branch. So before you even begin to think about recruitment or retention, you want to think about what is your plan for keeping your current membership engaged. Actually, I think we're slightly ahead, Tremaine, on the slides part. There we go. So you want to start thinking about how you're engaging your current membership, and you want to start thinking about the role that your virtual platforms are going to play in how you're enhancing the membership with your branch. So you want to start off by doing some kind of anonymous sort of survey, right? And that gives the folks in your branch a real opportunity to respond freely and openly about their experience, and it also gives them the opportunity to share their ideas about how you can improve their experience as a branch. There are so many different user-friendly platforms that you can use exactly for this. I personally really love SurveyMonkey, and if you've received an email from me, as I'm sure you have, you know that I rely heavily on SurveyMonkey. Google Forms is also really great, really user-friendly, and most of you probably already have access to it already through your Gmail account. And those are just two off the top of my head that I use quite frequently, and they can be really helpful in both their usability and in engaging how your current membership are like interacting with your branch, right? So with that said, and as we're talking about sort of polling and evaluating your current membership, exit interviews are also really helpful for learning as well, right? You want to hold these virtual exit interviews when members are leaving, and not just to say well, why are you leaving, right? You want to know more about their overall experience, right? What was their entire experience like, not just the moment that sort of led up to them deciding to move on to your branch, right? Because people leave for all kinds of reasons, because whether they're moving or they just don't have the time. So you want to know about their experience with your branch. So make sure you're conducting exit interviews whenever you have a member that might be moving on. Another key step is having sort of a branch-wide effort to develop a clear and strong mission-based strategic plan. And when you have a strong strategic plan, you're going to have a virtual event calendar that complements that plan as well, right? So that way you not only have a plan that has clearly laid out goals, you have your virtual event calendar that complements that plan, and and you're able to stick to the scope of that plan, so that way when other ideas sort of float out there, you can sort of put the brakes on it and say, okay, this is slightly outside of the scope that we want to do now, but this is something that we can think of in the future, right? And that way you're always staying on top of things, and your branch is fully invested in the goals that are laid out in your strategic plan, right? So a good way to work with the folks in your branch to develop a great strategic plan is to develop virtual committees, right? So whether you're using Zoom or Facebook or any one of the many different webinar platforms that are out there, it's all an opportunity to experiment with those platforms and have different different committees that are working together to really build out a strong strategic plan that everyone can be invested in, that everyone understands, and that everyone feels really good about, right? So once you have your strategic plan that's laid out, that everyone loves and agrees on and can even vote on, make sure you participate in other efforts like national incentive programs like 5-Star. I know some of you have received many emails from me in the past if your branch is a 5-Star participant, and I'm sure with your experience, you've seen how it can really help with your team building efforts. It really depends heavily on you being able to lean on the expertise of different leaders in your branch and different members of your branch. So I highly recommend, if your branch is not participating in incentive programs like that, give it a shot and see how it works for you. Lastly, when we're talking about your current membership, make sure that you're always recognizing and celebrating your current membership, right? Because if you've been with the branch for a long time, you really want to see the fruits of that effort and the fruit of the time that you put into that branch, right? So celebrate that. Make sure those people are always being looked at for the next leadership role. Make sure those people are being leaned on for mentorship, and their expertise is really relied upon when you're thinking about your future planning, because they're really important to the success of your branch. So make sure you're also hosting virtual celebrations, because at the end of the day, we're going back to that virtual component, right? These are all things that can be done virtually. You want to make sure you're hosting like virtual parties. Like I've been to so many different virtual events, birthday parties. I've even been to a virtual wedding. So there's really there's no limit to what can be done on these platforms, right? So make sure you're really using this opportunity to celebrate folks and their milestones, their anniversaries, and even special members like your legacy circle folks. Like make sure that they're feeling the love through these virtual settings, because it's definitely it really is only limited to your imagination here, right? So we can move on to the recruitment side, Tremaine. Awesome. Thank you. Great. So now that we've discussed sort of that clearly outlined strategic plan, if it's clear and it's strong, it's definitely going to include a plan for recruitment as well, right? So like your retention efforts, this is going to start in-house, right? You're going to want to find out what works and what doesn't work before you bring in new members into the fold, right? Because you don't want to bring people into a burning house. You want to know like what's going on, what can you fix before you bring new folks in. And I highly recommend that you all lean on AAUW's new DEI toolkit, so that you're gauging whether or not your branch has a culture of inclusion, or whether you have some things that you can work on in that area, right? So once we wrap up here, I'm happy to share the link to that DEI toolkit so that you can all go and check that out. So recruitment is also really important to your retention focus, right? Because it requires all hands on deck. Your whole branch has to be engaged in this effort in order for it to be really successful, right? So develop sort of a 30-second like elevator pitch, right? 30 seconds. What is AAUW? What is my branch about? What do we work on? Why folks are joining this effort, right? And make sure that everyone sort of has an idea of what that 30-second pitch looks like, right? Because if you find someone in your network, someone you know in your family, someone you know at work, and you're thinking, wow, like I think my branch can do a lot for this person, or this person has a lot of energy for for social justice or fighting for gender equity, and they'd be great for my branch. Be prepared to give that elevator pitch, right? Be prepared to let them know what your branch is about. Um, so at the same time, you want to make sure that your your recruitment efforts have strong goals and that they're fun, right? So make some incentives for recruiting and retaining certain members, right? You can have like a shared sort of Google Docs. I love shared Google Docs. All my friends have um, know me as a person who will set up a shared document in a second, right? And everyone can edit those things in real time. You can make sure that everyone has access to this document, and it really gives your branch the opportunity to be fully involved in the success and growth of your branch. So try a shared Google document where you're keeping track of recruiting efforts. Make sure there are some incentives for bringing new folks in and for when they stay. You can use those shared documents for like keeping score. You can have tiered rewards. Again, all of these things, all things that can be done virtually. So when you're talking about like rewarding folks, like creating badges, creating certificates, I personally love Canva. I use that for absolutely everything. So if you want to create like a certificate or a badge or some way of like recognizing the efforts of folks in your branch um, to build on your recruitment and retention efforts, use things like that. They're very user friendly, and they're, trust me, as someone who has zero experience in graphic design, I recommend it fully. Right. So once we're making our recruitment efforts sort of like all hands on deck, fun, virtual. It's good to remember that yes, we want to eventually get to a point where we can do our in person events and be able to share space together. It's important to remember that those efforts can only go as far as people are able and willing to actually attend those events, right? And we want to make sure that we're being inclusive. So accessibility is also very, very important. So even when you begin hosting your in-person events, make sure that you have that virtual component as well, right? Folks should always be able to attend your event, even if you're in on the other side of the country. Like everyone should be able to attend, and so that accessibility is really important to making sure that we're all succeeding and thriving in this new normal, right? So as we're thinking about how we can all contribute and do these things virtually. Think about all the ways that you are online as an individual and not just with your branch, right? Some of us are on social media like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and I Clubhouse is a thing now. There's all these different social media platforms that so the possibilities are endless for reaching out to your network. And again, that in-person component will always be there. That's that tradition that will never go anywhere. So make sure that you're always looking into your network, your personal network first, right? Because when we're thinking about building community, you're always going to want to start with the people that you know, the people that you've been connected with, that you know very well, right? um, and with that, we can wrap up this portion of our presentation.
Going to put up the final slide because this will be the tail end of the recorded X session. Then we're going to get into our breakout group. So again, just for those of you joining us, don't leave yet, but I want to thank you for participating. And if you want to wave for future folks that are going to be looking at this in the future, do so now. But thank you again for joining us. And we are going to, so we can wrap up the recorded portion.